All right, good evening, everybody. We're at 7 o'clock, and we are ready to go. We're going to be a little bit smaller of a debate, I think. So, were we competing against the Parade of Lights?
Yeah.
Oh, man. I was going to throw out candy, too. So, this is our Braver Angels debate. My name's Jeff Pospisil. I'm one of the local leaders here for Braver Angels, along with Joel Allen and Alethea and Carter. So we are glad you took time to join us here. We are going to have hopefully a pretty good debate, hopefully some diverse opinions. It's about physical and cognitive testing for presidential candidates. If you're not familiar with the Braver Angels debate, Braver Angels is all about trying to heal this political divide that we have in the country, where it seems like people can't even talk if they have a difference of opinion. And you've probably experienced that, and about 7 years ago, right around 2016, this Braver Angels launched, and that's our goal, is to start making it so we can have good discussions on difficult topics where we know people in the room disagree. So, let me see. I'm going to see if I can... Maybe I can't. So, I swear... Can I just point at you and something happens, or what? Yeah, I got it on. Oh, is it going now? Okay, good. Maybe I just got to stand here. So what is a Braver Angels debate? A Braver Angels debate is not like most other debates that you might see this time of year. It is really what we call it, a collective search for the truth. So that's what we're trying to do. And we are going to try, it's going to be formatted like a regular debate in a lot of ways. We're going to have people speaking for, and we're going to have people speaking against. There will be a timer. We're going to start off, the first speeches can be up to 4 minutes, and then we're going to start going down to 3 minutes. I don't know, do we have a gavel, Joe? Joel? Yeah. So there will be a gavel, and so when you're down to the last 30 seconds, I might give it a little tap, just to let you know that it's time to start making your point and getting ready to put the brakes on. So the other thing is, oh man. Got really good transitions here too, so I don't want them. So what is a Braver Angels debate is not. So Braver Angels debate is not like this, where we're trying to make a really good point so that'll zing somebody and we're trying to embarrass the other side. That is what it's not. The other thing is, we're not keeping score. This is like a regular high school debate. And so we're not trying to keep score. We're not trying to be winners necessarily. And in fact, a win in Braver Angels. So most of us got back from Thanksgiving vacation, and we had probably some discussions with our family. Maybe some of them might have turned political, and some families, they are more like this, where somebody's out of control, wild, and a win is if we can have a difference of opinion and we don't get out of control. So the other opposite side of that is, all right, the other opposite side of that is this, where a lot of times there might be an elephant in the room and we just ignore it. So I don't know if you've ever been at a family event or any other thing where, yeah, we know there's something wrong, somebody says something, but nobody else is speaking up, and I don't want to stir the pot, so we just ignore it. So for us, a win is having the courage to speak your point, even knowing that other people are going to disagree. So that is a win. So that's what we want, is to be able to listen to people that disagree, be able to speak, even though we know other people disagree, and be able to work through that. All right. We do have rules, so we have 4 rules. So first one is, always say what you actually think and believe. Always say what you actually think and believe. So that's the most important thing. We're not looking for necessarily... Yeah, we're not looking for, I don't know, maybe not the best argument, but we're looking for what you experience, because you're the only one that is going to bring this perspective, can bring that perspective to here. So, because it's your perspective, it's what you actually believe, it's what you actually believe and think. The second one is, all questions shall be addressed to me as soon as I put my hat on, because once I put my hat on, I become Mr. Moderator. So, if, let's just say Carter says something stupid, and Joel, you want to say something back to him. If he starts saying, Carter, you said something stupid, I'll interrupt him, and I'll say, you're talking to me. And then you could say something. So then you can make his point. But either way, you're talking to me. So when you want to speak, you're always talking to me. I swear, it's like random. So rule number 3, express approval by tapping. So if you hear something or after a speech, you go ahead and tap your chair, and that is how we, instead of clapping, that's how we express our approval. Oh man, it really is random. And the last one, don't challenge speakers by demanding they verify their sources. So we're not going to be caught up in that. I'm married. I know how many times Google has actually won a fight for me. It's almost zero. It doesn't even matter if I have the right answer, because it ruins the whole debate. And that's basically what this does too. So a lot of times we still want to hear what you think and believe, and not necessarily what Google has published out there. All right. All right. So now we are ready for the debate. I will... Did you say you had the... All right. So we do have a gavel. Who are our first speakers? Carter is? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the topic, and because this is a really cool slide too. Isn't that the coolest? So the question is, what should be done when presidential candidates seem physically or mentally unfit? And... So I remember when I was growing up how fast presidents aged. So these are before and after. So these were two fairly healthy men when they went into there, and you could see how the office aged them. And it really took a toll. Both of these men were 40s and 50s, I believe. And then you look at our current top political candidates right now. We have President Biden, who he's 81 years old, so most people would not want to take on a job at the age of 81. And even the candidate on the other side, President Trump, he had a Diet Coke button. I didn't realize that, but I knew he had an unhealthy diet, and he'll be 77 years old, and he was drinking something like 12 Diet Cokes a day, is what it was reported. So anyway, so it does make you concerned. 81-year-old candidate who has fallen a couple times, and then a man that is also 77 years old and drinks mostly Diet Coke and fast food. So there are concerns. So our resolution is, those seeking the office of President of the United States shall, prior to registering for the Federal Election Commission, submit to physical and cognitive testing conducted by independent physicians. So that is what our resolution is. Are you speaking to the affirmative or? I'm in the affirmative. So I'm going to go ahead and, now we are in order, and I'll let you go.
Should I speak up there, or where should I, just anywhere?
Just maybe right in that.
All right, sound good?
All right.
All right, thank you.
It doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you are on. The job of the President of the United States can be mentally and physically demanding. Throughout the history of the American presidency, the leader of the United States has to make decisions that can change our country and, in some cases, the world. These decisions must be made in critical times and under a competent mind. We have read in history that while the position has so much power and stress, it can also be a thankless job. Each president throughout the history has dealt with some deal of outside stress that can be at times crushing on an individual. These are just a few of the factors that are causing people to ask the question if it is necessary to make sure the President of the United States is mentally and physically competent to properly uphold his oath to the Constitution of the United States. That is why I'm here today in support of implementation of an exam to test the cognitive and physical health of those seeking the presidency of the United States.
All right. Do we have any questions for Carter? Alethea has it right behind you.
Are the results of this examination to be made public?
That's a good question. I believe yes, they should. They're running for a public office, and they are making decisions that affect everyday people like ourselves, and so I believe yes, should be public. Yes.
Any other questions? All right.
Could the speaker address the question of how one determines who would be constituted an independent physician, given the controversial nature of the judgments that are going to be rendered?
It would be very difficult, I admit, to find an independent physician who would be unbiased either way when it comes to his political views. I agree with that. But there should be, like I said, there should be some test. That's the thing. Because we have seen both President Trump and President Biden, they both have some difficulties mentally. That's the thing.
All right. What? Yeah, are you all right? One more question?
My question is cognitive testing. Does that mean that you're qualified to go into a nursing home without help, or does that mean that you're educated at a level of a bachelor's degree in, history and sciences?
When it's cognitive testing, that is looking for any signs of dementia, mental illness, etc. Yes, they should be testing your capabilities, yes.
All right. Thank you. All right. Do we have our speech in opposition? All right. Jordan.
Can I use your timer?
Yeah, go for it. Now I got to get it back down. There you go.
Okay. Thanks everyone for having me here tonight. Joel gave me about 24 hours to prep for this, so hopefully I can fire from the hip pretty good. So the first thing I want you guys to all think about, you guys raised some great questions, is we've all seen on the internet or in real life someone we probably don't agree with. Like, you look at what they say or what they write, and you're like, well, how in the hell do those guys come up with that? Now, imagine those are the people administering the cognitive test. It says here, an independent physician. We all know that not everyone agrees with the same thing. So who's developing the test? Who gets to decide on what questions get put on that test? Is it going to be Congress that decides? Because most laws have to go through Congress through legislation. Now, with the 20% approval rating, based on the United States, the citizens of the United States, I don't think I want them being the ones that administer the test. 20% approval, that's worse than any president in history. Einstein once said, you can't judge the intelligence of a fish based on how good it can climb a tree. So the test itself is so important. And the control would go to, instead of the president, the control would go to the person administering the tests. Now, Einstein's parents also thought he was disabled as a young child. Which brings me to another person, Thomas Edison. He was considered dyslexic. Could Thomas Edison pass one of these tests? Because he invented a light bulb. Can you guys imagine if we didn't have light bulbs today because he couldn't pass a cognitive test? How dangerous is that? Stephen Hawking. We all know him. He's one of the smartest people to ever live, a theoretical physicist, and he was severely physically disabled. Would we want to lose out on all the progress he's made just because he has a physical disability? I don't think so. Now, I understand we need smart, strong, intelligent leaders to run this country and to, be our person that's in control. But we should collectively be able to judge that for ourselves. But how? Now, if the goal of this is to figure out a solution, I don't think we should mandatory have them do tests, but they could voluntarily do it. If we have 10 people that want to run for president and 3 of them decided not to take the cognitive test, I think we all could agree that we probably shouldn't vote for that person. What a great solution. A volunteer, not mandatory. One thing I like to do, and when I question anything, is I call it my island test, my desert island test. Let's say a plane crashes on a desert island and there's 20 people. Now, if we all decided we need a leader for this island, do you think we would vote on that person based on what we know about them? Or do you think we would pick some random guy in the audience to give some other guy a test and base our decision off what he thinks? Of course we wouldn't. We would just vote for the person we thought would do best for the job. Now, what's a better test than hundreds of millions of U.S. citizens making that decision for themselves after watching debates, long-form interviews, and any other tests we could give them, all voluntary. Now, our founding fathers of this country wanted the power to be in the people's hands. This, in my opinion, would take that power from the people and give it to the people who are administering the tests. We don't need any special interest groups or independent physicians making our decisions for us. We should be able to vote for that. And I always err on the side of freedom, and our founding fathers wanted that. So I think we should use, am I still good? Yep. Okay, I think our founding fathers wanted us to be in control, and that decision that they made us one of the most powerful countries in history, and I think we should continue that tradition. I'm ready for questions. That was pretty good, huh? That was good. Only one practice round.
Do we have questions?
I'm wondering if the speaker has considered the fact, just the issue of constitutionality, and that restrictions on the presidency are all in the Constitution. Would this require some kind of constitutional amendment so that the restrictions on the presidency or the qualifications would all be in the Constitution?
That's a great question. I had thought about that too. Couldn't fit it in my 4 minutes. But I think any sort of form of legislation reduces the amount of freedom we have in our country. I think even if we make a mistake as a country and as citizens, we should live with that mistake. But if you try to legislate all mistakes out, legislation is going to bring mistakes as well. So I think rather than Congress deciding to make an amendment with 586 people or whatever that number is, I'd rather give it to 330 million people to make that decision. Power to the people.
We currently have something approximating this with regard to financial information. It's not mandatory, and you can't be can't be kicked off the ballot for not submitting it. But it's fairly widely accepted that we want to know something about the financials of a candidate or a set of candidates. Could the same principle be applied with regard to physical testing or cognitive testing?
I think so on a voluntary basis, right? I mean, right now everyone's like, I want to see your tax records. I'd like to see you pass a test by an independent physician. Maybe these top 5 everyone agrees with. You get some lean in either direction, and you could say, whatever. I mean, cognitive is probably less subjective than ideology. So yeah, I would agree with that. In my opinion, everything should be voluntary, not mandatory, and we can base our decisions based on how they react from that. I mean, I probably couldn't run a 5K today. Give me a little practice, I could, but I don't know what the test is.
I would invite the speaker to consider 2 challenges to his argument. The first being that objective tests for cognitive ability do exist. I have a friend who's a psychologist, and he administers them all the time. They're standardized all around the country. He gives the same test that is given by many other practitioners. And secondly, that if the founders had wanted to vest selection of the president in the people, why did they create an electoral college that probably consisted of people who would have physical access to the people running and get to assess their cognition through direct contact?
Those are some fantastic questions. Electoral college, I have a real big tough time with that. Personally, I don't like it. I do like the popular vote. I understand why they did that. That's a tough call. I think you got me on that one. The first question, cognitive tests, again, I only had 24 hours. I have absolutely no clue what a cognitive test really consists of. I may be able to make better decisions based on the tests themselves, but you know, here's how a government program works in some cases. Let's pass it based on everything we like. Once it's in there, we can change it to, yeah, we kind of like it, you know what I mean? You always want to design whatever weapon that you have or whatever power and give it to your opponent. If you think that's fair, then maybe that's the thing. But if it's something so dangerous you don't want your opponent to have, then maybe you shouldn't have it either. I'd have to see the test. I'd have to see the test.
All right, thank you, George.
Oh, sorry. I thought you wanted the microphone.
I do too. So one of the things, I don't know if you noticed the background, it's the presidential physical fitness exam. How many of you remember taking that? I was just wondering, so some of us took that. I remember taking it. I was just wondering if they had to do so many sit-ups and push-ups and a mile, and anyway. So, yeah, reach. I don't know about what the cognitive one is, but anyway, so, all right. Thank you, by the way, for our first speakers. Do we have someone else willing to share their views on this subject? Alethea? Yes, sir. Yeah, do you want to? We should make an aisle.
Thank you. I don't have a position so much as a couple of data points. History has given us antecedents. Famously, FDR had polio and kept his physical disabilities as much out of the eye of the voters as possible, to the extent of having things that gave him the false appearance of being able to stand. And he, of course, was heavily compromised by his last term, and by the time of the Potsdam Conference, perhaps not really able to function. Or Yalta, rather. Truman, his successor went to Potsdam, so Yalta. And there was another one, I'm not thinking of his name right now, who had a stroke, and someone else ran the country for quite some time until he died. Was it Wilson? Yes, and Edith ran the country, right? So sometimes we can look to the past and see what we can learn from it. Just a thought.
Any other questions for our speaker?
I have a question I'd like to bring up.
Yes.
You want to just talk
Go ahead.
So this basically says that it's.
Oh,
This one says it's prior to election. So you could pass a cognitive test. I don't know. I don't know what the format is here, but you could pass a cognitive test, like FDR, and then later in your presidency, you never have to retest. I guess that'd be another question, because I could pass a test. Heck, I could pass a drug test at any time, but that doesn't mean I can't go do some drugs tomorrow, you know what I mean, once I'm the president. So when are these tests administered?
So, and I will take this as a clarification, that this is prior to the election, so it's before you're able to run for the office, before you're able to file with the Federal Election Commission, which allows you to run. So you can, like FDR, some other ones, but you even think about it, like Ronald Reagan and his second term, would he have passed the cognitive test? He later developed dementia, right? So I don't know. We wouldn't know at that point if he was suffering or not. Same kind of deal, FDR. So, all right.
I don't know if I need an answer, just throwing it out there.
Am I supposed to sit down?
You can sit down now. All right. Do we have...
I have a comment I'd like to make. So this is, I guess, like many of us, we can see this on both sides, but it seems like in this day and age, one thing that might be of value in having a cognitive exam is that in this day and age when there's so many, when we can fake, technology can be used to make a person slow down their speech and make it look, for instance, I just was reading this afternoon that there, instances where Biden has been made to look like slurring his speech more than he actually did, and it was just kind of just a tiny little tweak to slow it down. So, in other words, because these people are often in the public making, or in the public nonstop. What am I saying? In the public nonstop, making, they are going to at times. I mean, any one of us would sound really silly or a little bit slurred. And so questions can easily arise simply because of the technology that's out there, simply because of the social media that's out there, simply because of the amount of time that they're in the public view, and that a cognitive test like this might be good to just kind of settle this, nope, the president can actually function and is in good physical health. It might be good to just have some kind of objective information out there that people can use next time the election rolls around and they're going to say we're going to vote for or run for a second term in office. But this kind of objective information could be helpful. It seems to me. Yeah.
So just a question. That was your 4 minutes, and somebody else's 4 minutes. So right now, I remember President Trump had his own physical exam a number of years ago, and he was the most healthy person to ever exist, I recall. And he also gave himself his own cognitive test, I believe, and filled in all the dots. I don't know but so what do you think about what does independent look like for you? So obviously President Trump's physicians, probably President Biden probably has similar physicians, similar tests. They have physicians that give them tests, but they're not independent. What does independent look like?
Yeah, there would have to be some kind of another independent body, or a body of people with equal, like Democrats and Republicans, that would have to approve the doctors and the psychologists that would be administering these exams. There would have to be some level of structure to provide confidence that the people that are running these exams don't have a serious political axe to grind. And so I can't imagine exactly what that would look like, but there'd have to be some kind of board with equal representation on both sides of the political divide making that decision, it seems to me.
Any other? So,
wouldn't it have to be a standardized test that is taken by a lot of people, not just them? So you've got a standardized test that's taken by 10,000 people and a passing grade is 70. And there's no independent analysis. It's did you pass or didn't you pass? And to me, the same thing on the physicals. There's lots of tables that will tell you if you have these characteristics, your lifespan is such and such. Right. And if you have less than a 90% chance of surviving 4 years, well, maybe you're out then. But it wouldn't be an independent person coming up with independent tests as much as just standardized testing that would be analyzed and reported.
I think some of the things that I've never done cognitive testing, but but a lot of times a physician, when they're interacting with you, they are trying to judge by even how you're behaving and how you are. So there's some of that is going to be subjective, even though we might try to be standardized as much as we can. I kind of do wonder about anything that might be subjective. So.
Well, I'll just put this question to anybody who would support testing, and that is, can you persuasively argue that it would be less controversial than what we currently have in terms of what constitutes news? I mean, I find it difficult in my own frame of reference to say that anybody would qualify as an independent physician in the political realm, because whatever the results of the thing, somebody's going to say, it's already a vested interest. You know, you're pushing a point of view.
I think, thank you. I think that even though there are always going to be questions about, you know, bias, it still helps to have, especially in the case of if it's a test like as Roger was describing, that's standardized, been used millions of times. You know, we know what the parameters are. It would, even though, of course, there are people that are going to be poking holes in it and, you know, are not accepting it. But the case, there are many, many people in the middle that could be, or people even on both sides of the political persuasion, that could be helped by something like that, even though there are always going to be rejectors. So I think there's a value for objective standards, even though they may be rejected by many. So.
Yeah, I would argue for some, if you're going to have a test, and I'm not sure I'm in for it, but you would have something like an SAT test, and you'd say, well, you know, a super bright student gets a 27, but you can get a 16 and still get into college, you know, and, you know, if you're not above a 16, we don't want you as president, and you take the standard test, and that's the way it is.
What do you think the country would look like? Let's say President Biden and President Trump or whoever took a cognitive test today and one of them was deemed unfit for presidency. What kind of backlash do you think would happen in our country? Because you all know that most people have a team they're on. Let's just say Trump said, oh, no, he's a moron and he can't pass it. Or same thing for Biden. Do you think that would be better or worse for the country rather than people being, because then they don't have the opportunity to even make a decision. It's just completely stripped away from them. Scary thought.
You know, it's even more interesting. So right now, let's say, just say President Trump, he'd be eliminated, and then you still have whatever 4 or 5 more candidates still available to choose for that side. With the sitting president not being able to run for re-election would be interesting, and I could see what yeah. I don't know if anybody else has.
I think I can probably speak loudly.
All right.
Okay. Oh, we're on live. Oh, great. Okay, I was just going to point out that in the resolution I see, it doesn't say that the results of the testing eliminate someone from the competition. It simply is information that's then provided to the voters for them to act on. I might say that as a voter, the more information that I get, the better I can vote. I would really object if somebody said you are not allowed to vote for this person because of the result of the test, but I might like it if they say here's some additional information you did not have access to before.
Yeah. So do we have any thoughts from our younger group that is probably more tested?
All right. So, surprisingly to you, probably, Dr. Allen, I'm against this. I don't believe that this would be a fair judgment of anybody. I think it's very ableist to be able to attack people based on their physical or cognitive abilities. I think you need to set a standard on what you're looking for, because if you say something like, oh, the president has to give speeches and has to talk to people all the time, then you could also be like, well, then somebody that's mute or somebody that's selectively mute, then therefore they can't be the president because they're not going to talk. I think you have to kind of level it out and make it make sense. Like, for example, I have really bad anxiety, and I think I would be fine as president. I don't think that would impact anything, but if somebody were to say, no, people with severe anxiety can't be president, then I would be cut out of the race. So I think it just depends on how you're testing, what you're testing. I mean, obviously, if somebody has dementia, they shouldn't be president because they don't have the mental capabilities to understand what is going on and keep track of everything that they've said. but I think you're gonna obviously fall into negative viewpoints of certain groups of people and start targeting people when you're trying to set a test for what normal is. I also think that it's hard to be able to judge competency. I think you can be absolutely insane and still understand what's going on. So just because somebody sucks doesn't mean that they're not a competent individual that can do their job. Because there's lots of politicians I don't agree with, but they still know how to rile people up and get them to the polls and pass laws, and they sometimes know what they're talking about. And I think trying to say you have to pass this normal, that's kind of expecting people to do one certain thing. If you expect people to do one certain thing, then you kind of deny the diversity of people and their individualism and their creativity.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah.
I'd like to, we'll get to the format. I wonder if the speaker, if the speakers considered, it just occurred to me while she was speaking, the case of George McGovern. His running mate was Tom Eagleton. His first running mate was Tom Eagleton, and then just a few days after the announcement was made, it turned out that he had had numerous electroshock therapies because of extreme anxiety, and it just wiped him out of the, McGovern had to drop him from the ticket and ended up with, well, he had tried to get about 5, 6 others, and they all said no, and finally got General Shriver to be on the ticket. But it's an interesting example of a person who had some issues with anxiety and depression, and the openness to those kinds of difficulties in a person that's a heartbeat from the presidency. In that day and age, people weren't open to that. Today, we're a lot more sensitive, and we recognize that someone that struggles with depression can still do a good job. And so it's just an example I was wondering if the speaker was aware of or had considered.
No, I wasn't. That was interesting. Thank you.
Any other?
I'm not so sure we don't put way too much emphasis on the president compared to who his cabinet is going to be and the top 50 people, because I would argue that in most cases, once all those people are in place, the president can go away for a month and nobody'd notice the difference.
Definitely, yeah.
I would like to enter one other example that causes me to pause on this, and that is that I forget which election it was, but in one of the elections involving Richard Nixon, a group of psychologists and others in healthcare, mental health, argued that he was mentally unstable, and it didn't fly because it was so contradictory to where a whole lot of people in the country were. But it's another example of where who sets the standards, and that's why I would have real difficulty with the notion that some ostensibly independent group even exists.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you have money and power, you can't have subjectivity. Like, everybody's going to have some opinion. They're going to try and do something, try and get some agenda across. That's just what happens. We like to think it doesn't happen, but, I mean, you put 10 people in a room, there's always going to be one that doesn't agree, so, yep.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
When you were mentioning the cabinet and the variety of people, and when you were speaking, directing my questions to you, you mentioned that sometimes we just have to live with our mistakes. And it made me think of our founders, and when they created the Constitution, they put in a system of checks and balances, so that if someone crazy couldn't pass a cognitive test, does have to go through, we've got a system set up to counteract that. So our founders have set it up, so it should work.
One comment about that concept is I think we've become so partisan that if the person is in our party, you know, they can get a 6 on their ACT and they're still okay. If they're in the other party, they have to get a 26 to be okay.
All right. Any other speeches in favor or in opposition?
Can I change my mind halfway through now that I've been on both sides?
Yes, you may.
So when Joel asked me to do this, I was like, well, what side am I on? I could argue either one. I mean, both of them, really, you could probably make the case. And now that I've listened to what everyone said, I mean, you're right. I guess I was under the impression that if you lost, if you didn't pass, you can't run. But I don't know why I inferred that, because it was nowhere in the statement whatsoever. So maybe if you were going to administer a test, you could say, hey, you're going to just either do it on public live television, or we're going to watch you, you know, I don't know what it is. Like, you know, can you follow the light like you're a drunk guy, or can you walk in a straight line? Whatever it is, at least if we knew what the questions are and then how to answer it, and then like you had said, put it on a scale, you know, and then everyone could say, oh, okay, so it's like he didn't get an A or a B or a C. It's like, you know, in category 1, this is how he scored, here's the video of how he did, and then we could all say, oh, okay, yeah, cool, like, guy can't tie his shoes, maybe he shouldn't run the country, or whatever the case is, you know, or maybe he can't tie his shoes, but he's one of the smartest guys ever. And you could base it on a whole spectrum of physical and mental cognitivity, you know. So, I mean, to me, and it's like, I got to see the test. If it's a great test that almost anyone could pass, that we could all watch, and we all know what the questions are, and we all can see the results, and we could all make the decision for ourselves, then I would probably flip sides pretty easy and say, you know what, that's fair, as long as it didn't completely disqualify them. Does that make sense? Yeah, am I allowed to switch sides halfway through this debate?
I'm going to ask a question. Okay. So, is there any concern, Mr. Moderator, with our enemies knowing the results of these tests?
Yeah, I mean, if you're running for president, you're probably one of the most public figures, you know. So, I mean, I would think if you have the confidence to say, like, maybe if you can't tie your shoes or you can't follow a line, maybe you shouldn't be the president. Maybe that's, you know, and maybe we need to make that decision ourselves. But that's a tough call.
I guess the reason I ask that is, like, there's this concern about President Putin and how all his health concerns, and if the Russians actually aired what's going on in him physically or mentally, we would know probably how to deal with them differently. So now let's just say they know about President Trump or President Biden, what his weaknesses are and what his challenges are. Would they take advantage of them?
Maybe it is. But again, if it's only administered at the beginning, we saw the pictures of year 1 and year 8. Something could happen year 5 and all of a sudden things have changed. And they look at the test and like, this guy's strong. He can tie his shoes better than anyone I've ever seen, you know. That may not make a difference. So again, I could lean either way on this subject. Again, to me, I think voluntary is probably better than mandatory. But if mandatory was like, hey, it's a simple test, I don't know. It's a tough call. You should give a speech.
Actually, I have a question for you. I'm not sure what my stance on this is yet, but what is really the importance of specifically like physical ability of a president? I feel that it's more, I feel like the cognitive testing would be more important, but what aspects of physical ability does a president need to have that's going to make like a huge impact on people of deciding whether they should vote for him or not?
Yeah, the only thing I could say to that is people want to follow a strong leader. You know, I mean, if you're walking around all like decrepit, some people may subconsciously say, you know, I don't want to be led by a guy that's weaker than me. You know, that might be the only thing I would think as far as physical. But yeah, I mean, I can't touch my toes without bending my knees. So good Lord, I couldn't. Go ahead. Yeah, well, if that's the barrier, then.
I just have some family and friends that are part of the military, and each year they have to take a physical test to stay a part of it. And our president is the commander-in-chief of our Army, our Navy, military, Space Force, So I think there's expectations that if you're going to be in charge of these men, or the commander-in-chief, you have to be physically fit, like we expect all of the people underneath him or her.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that too, right? Like, again, maybe if it's mandatory and if you pick the guy that's like, holy cow, that guy's a genius, pass all these tests, and he can run, an ultra marathon 100 miles, most people are probably going to be more inclined to vote on that, So it's a tough call. And I think most of the military is considered overweight, so I don't even know what kind of, I think it's like 60%, or it's a pretty high number, so I don't know exactly where that line is. Again, you'd have to see the test. I think right now you have to run, 2 miles in 20 minutes or something to pass the physical, but I bet I might not be able to do that either. I don't know. Depends how I'm feeling. So again, I could be swayed either way. It's a very tough decision.
Mr. Moderator, it just has occurred to me as we've been talking, just hearing different points of view helps me to kind of settle in my mind, my perspective, because I walked in here with, not having a strong opinion. But as we've been having this conversation, several things have kind of come to my mind as like, yes, that's a key issue. And it's a key way of thinking about it. And one of them is something Roger said and something Chris said. So Roger, when you said, these are, if we're talking about tests that are well understood, given to thousands of people, psychologists well understand it, so especially cognitive. I can see how cognitive is more important, but physical is important too. So if that's what we're talking about, a test that it's not just something that someone made up, it's a standard test that's been well understood, that makes sense to me that a president would have to do that, or would at least be encouraged to do it. And the other is the optionality on two levels. The optionality of the president choosing to take the test. It wouldn't have to, but it would still be a good thing, and it kind of like releasing your taxes. It's a good thing. You can get away without doing it, but it's strongly recommended. And then finally, just what Chris said about the fact that if this is considered not something that they, disqualifies anyone, but just helpful information to the public as they make this decision, it's like information that helps the public decide. With those factors, I'm more comfortable with the notion of testing being a part of the voting process. So. Yeah, so that's just the way in my mind I've kind of settled. The conversation has helped me to settle on a perspective. So,
all right.
I have a question for the speaker. Do you think that, even if it was voluntary, do you think that these results of the physical and cognitive exams and testings, do you think that's going to affect people and how they vote a lot? Because it seems to me that they would end up paying more attention to that than really what the president's experiences are like, or his political experiences specifically, and his opinions. And so I feel like people would end up paying attention more to that than what's really needed for a president to, because presidents will presidential candidates will go campaigning and they'll talk about, this is what we're going to do and this is my stance on everything. But I feel like if there were physical and cognitive tests, a lot of people would become really lazy and not pay attention to the president's stances and pay more attention to what those results are. Which one looks best on our party? Let's vote that guy. And so I feel like that would be a concern. What's your opinion on that? Or what is the speaker's opinion on that?
That's, again, a very good point. And I think that it would have to be seen as a part of a larger picture. As long as it's seen as a part of a larger picture, all of those other factors are extremely important. And every voter already now has to kind of sort through what is more important to the person as they choose making that choice. So it would simply be more information to help the person make a wiser choice, but each voter would have to decide for themselves the way in which they weight that information. And by the way, I thought I should just say something too, or I might say something. I did have to take a cognitive test a while back. I had to take it for insurance reasons. I forget exactly why. But It was hard. The cognitive test was very hard. It hurt my brain. I don't know when I've had to think so hard, so they would give you a whole list of words and you'd have to remember them in that order. And they're all, it's not easy. But they are standardized tests. I mean, they are tests that are well understood and are given millions of times. And so it could be public information that comes from a test like that could be helpful information as people select not only a president, but other people of high national office. So.
My question would be, how do we get the results of this test through the news media without so much disinformation so that it's not meaningless?
Well, I remember when the Mueller report came out a few years ago, you could buy, and we had it in our library, and I didn't read it, but I skimmed through it and read sections. So maybe it could be considered something like that, something that would be published. People, of course, are going to, interpret it like the Mueller report, interpret it in different ways.
What news staff channel?
Exactly, yeah. But it still helps to have an objective guideline that even though it's going to be interpreted by different news outlets in different ways. So.
I thought about that even with the tax returns, because an accountant can look at a tax return and say that's a smart idea. Somebody else could look at it and say, why do you not make enough money? So anyway. Any other speeches for or against? Had a couple people watching. Are you interested at all at? And I know I haven't heard from you yet either, so I didn't know if you wanted to. Not trying to put people on the spot, but I am. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm still not sure which side I fall. I came in thinking that I was kind of on the pro side for having testing, and I'm not quite sure, because there are a lot of things to consider. But, I mean, some of the points that have been made, I think, are valid. Like, we expect the military and many other professions to do some kind of testing, whether cognitive or physical, and so I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I agree that voluntary is probably the better way, maybe rather than forced, but I think, yeah, it's more pieces of information, and I think we need to take all those pieces of information that we have and run them through the filter. We have, popular vote is part of it, and hopefully we would be able to tell, and, if we're all watching them interact, hopefully we'll see, hey, they're not doing well, and we won't vote for them, but that hasn't been happening, so I'm not really sure. But hopefully that would resolve itself without having to have these tests if we were able to just watch them and evaluate them on our own. So I'm still a little bit unsure of what I think, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if it's voluntary.
Thank you.
I don't know the exact piece or the primary source. I know we're not supposed to mention sources, but I believe that Thomas Jefferson once wrote that what will kill liberty or what will kill a republic, and it was lethargy and misunderstanding. And I feel like that's kind of where we're at right now. Like, what's keeping people from finding out for themselves and doing the investigation and finding out what's their physical and cognitive abilities? Or, as asked by another audience member, how do we get the media to show without all the biases? Like, are we at a point where we're at the death of a republic or the end of liberty when we're not thinking for ourselves or believing misunderstandings, or we need a physician to tell us if this person is cognitive or not? I could just talk to them and know if they have dementia. So it makes me worry a little bit, but I don't like to think fearfully. So these kind of activities, I think, are really important for us to stay active, so we're not lazy and lethargic, and we can clarify some misunderstandings that we may have.
All right.
I guess I will step up front. 2 points. point number one is, if we're going to have the testing, I think it should not be voluntary. If it is voluntary, the only ones who will take it are the ones who are pretty sure they're going to pass it. And the ones who think they aren't going to pass it will make a lot of noise about why they shouldn't participate in it. In that case, it becomes just another form of advertising, and I think we have enough of that. We need more information and less spin. Two, and to your point, sir, how do we get the information to the public without the press spinning it? A frustration of mine is that while the original source documents are there for so many things of public interest, almost no one ever reads them. You mentioned the Mueller report, the very famous treaty with Iran, the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. It was only, 13 pages long? I heard a lot of strong opinions for and against, but almost nobody offering those opinions seems to have read the treaty. And here, if we put the information right out there on the internet where everyone could read it, they'd probably read their favorite news outlet's opinion on it rather than simply going and looking at it for themselves. I find that sad. I don't know what to do about it.
So when I was growing up, every news channel had to give equal time to the Republicans and the Democrats, and I don't know, fair use, I think, or it's not quite right, but it was something like that. And that way, if you watched one channel, you got both sides of the issue. You know, today we obviously don't have that, and most people have one channel that they get their news from. It was in the 60s, 70s, and I think maybe even into the 80s, but we decided that wasn't appropriate, and we have what we have today, obviously, which is very biased news on probably both sides.
If that was something I can respond to, I'd agree, and I'd say I think the siloing that we're doing is hurting us as a country. I don't know if we can have a democracy when we're not listening to one another.
All right. Are we ready to move on to the debriefing part, do you think? So I'm going to go ahead and call the debate to an end. And one of the important things about this whole process... Now I'm a regular person again. So the debriefing part is actually, what did you experience? I know there's probably some of us are planning on voting blue, some of us are planning on voting red, some of us might be in favor of this, or actually we ended up somewhere in the middle for a lot of us. So, but what did you experience? How was this experience for you? Did you learn anything new? Did you change your opinion? How was this valuable to you as an experience?
Like I said, when I came into this, I was ready to debate either side. I just chose the one that I think my gut feeling was. But every time someone questioned me, I was like, "Yeah, you're right. I should just jump onto your side." That make a lot of sense. When you said the military, I was like, "Yeah, they're in charge of the military. Why shouldn't they take the test?" You know, when people ask me questions, like, "Man, I could flip flop either way on this." So it's such a tough decision because it could go either way. No matter what the argument is, there's such good on both ends. So I don't know, my mind changed a lot tonight. That's all I'll say. It's very interesting. Great job to everyone with all their questions, by the way. There we go.
Anybody else want to share?
Just that a comment that you made that didn't get a lot of discussion is going to echo in my head for a while as it ruminates. That you said this is ableist. I don't know. I've got to think on that one for a while, but it's definitely going to stay in my brain and get worked on. I'd like to not be an ableist. If I'm being an ableist, I have to identify that in myself and stamp it out. Thanks for bringing it up.
Would someone clarify what they mean by an ableist?
Yeah, I was Googling that.
So ableism is any type of action, thought process, either blatantly stated or subconsciously expected that goes against disabled people. So if we're talking about, like I talked about, if people are mute and they can't talk, then if we were to expect them that they have to give speeches, that would be ableist because we're not adapting to their needs. And same goes for if you're like mentally ill or if you're autistic or something like that. If you're not offering an option for people to be able to succeed and are forcing them to kind of fit into that like normative, neurotypical, like you have to do this to be a normal person kind of thing, then that's ableist. Like we're not adapting to people's individual needs and working around their disabilities and their mental illnesses. Does that make sense?
Would anybody else like to share how they experience this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting just to hear all the perspectives because it does really help you sharpen your own thoughts and really consider other opinions. And so I think that's been really great because someone mentioned siloing, and I think that's happening a lot in our country where it's like, this is what we think, we're all in this camp, and we're not going to question what's in this camp because we're in this camp. And so I think we could really all benefit if our country in general was going through things like this, just to be hearing both sides because there are a lot of valid things that the other side from you will have. So just, yeah, to keep asking questions, to keep considering things, to keep changing our opinions, I think is a good thing. To just land in one camp and be like, I'm never leaving here, I don't think is a beneficial thing.
I think one of the things that sticks with me, so I'm a CPA, and that stands for Can't Pass Again. So, which, again, I don't know if you can study up for a cognitive test. I mean, a lot of this is if it's a very standardized test. Can you, a CPA exam is pretty intensive. I took that, and I literally cannot pass that again. I don't think I can. I'm too old now. So anyway, but it did make me wonder about some of these things. Even if they were put out there, could somebody game the system by studying up for a cognitive test or doing a bunch of sit-ups for a week to get in shape? Or, you know, I was also in the military, so you had to do the push-ups, sit-ups, and 2 mile. So I don't know. Anyway. Anybody else?
One last thing. One of the things that I appreciate about this opportunity is that there is a sense of, we all had those little aha moments, right? So that where someone said something and it kind of clicked in us, and like when Liz talked about ableism, that struck me too, and you know, and it's odd. In my circumstance, when I know a lot about the life of George McGovern, and it occurred to me, oh yeah, ableism explains that whole episode very well, because people were not willing to consider the fact that a person could struggle with depression and still be a very effective vice president. And so anyway, I just appreciate, I want to thank all of you for coming, because this experience gives you those aha moments that really help you to kind of get a clearer idea. And there's a real pleasure in that, in feeling that you can now think through this topic on a deeper level because of this conversation. So appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. So I appreciate you taking time. And again, I should have brought candy if ever you're going to miss the Parade of Lights. So anyway, but I
mentioned the sheet back there for the.
Okay, there is a sign-up sheet, right? To be part of our official mailing list, and that way you'll just get announcements from us, email announcements. We do have spring events coming up, so we're planning another. Topics, I don't know if everything's completely finalized, but the lake debate, we were going to talk about who pays for it, so which might be interesting, because another lake debate, who pays for it. The one national one we were debating on, what was it, green energy?
Talk about green energy. Roger had a great idea of doing, anyway, so we'll talk about it, doing ranked choice voting. That would be a real interest.
So there's interesting ones around that, and then also having another red-blue conversation, and I was part of that one, and that was interesting because then you do just sit right across from the other person that if you're red and the other person's blue and you're talking about how did you come to where you're at, you know, and what do you believe in? And it really is eye-opening to sit across from somebody, right? And it's not a confrontational thing, and so it's interesting. So those announcements will be going out, and if you're on the list, you'll be sure to get them. So, all right.
Thanks for coming.
Thank
everyone.
you.
More cookies and coffee. And